Today I was asked to give a bit of a macro overview on the U.S. fashion retail sector in the United States. So I'm just gonna, I shortened that a bit, and I'm gonna added some slides at the end really to talk about how to enter the U.S. market. A big macro overview. So in a word, I think since 2008, the U.S. fashion retail sector has been very challenging. 2008 obviously was the big global recession, the meltdown in the markets in the fall of 2008. Everybody was impacted obviously, but for the U.S., unemployment rate for about 3-4 months, everybody, 1.5 million people were losing their jobs. They had no disposable income. Consumer confidence went down. Retailers were stuck with all this inventory that they couldn't sell. They had to give deep discounts, deep pricing discounts. Their margins were terrible. Their share price went off the walls. So it was a really terrible environment, 2008 and 2010. And as a result of that, though, some interesting new dynamics emerged. One was the whole concept of flash sale sites. And I'm sure you're familiar with companies like Gilt.com or Rue La La, Ideally, Outlook. All of these were started in that environment because consumers wanted designer brands. They just couldn't afford retail price. So here was this great online venue where you logged in at 12 noon and they had these flash sites and it was all the rage and there was so much pent-up demand for buying, designer brands at a discount. So that all emerged during that time period. And then there was also another concept. It was called the rent to never own type of companies. And that's something like Rent the Runway. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. But again, it's an opportunity to buy an Alexander Wang dress, or some other beloved designer label, rent it for 3 days and return the dress, hopefully in good condition or the same condition you received it. And so this was a way for young consumers, shoppers, to be able to look the part without having actually to pay the price. So that was a whole new dynamic market, and online really took off in this environment. But on the retail side, just in general, and a trend that developed during this time period and carries with us today in the US is what we call the new normal. And by that we mean, consumers are not willing to pay retail price. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the head of Saks, and he said if he can't even give a 30% discount, it just doesn't move people. It doesn't get people into the store. No one's willing to pay retail price anymore in the United States. There's this whole new normal. They want designer brands, they crave quality, they crave new merchandise all the time, but they just don't want to pay regular price. They're looking for deals, and they will go online, they'll compare shop online, they'll go to multiple stores just to get that specific dress that they want at the best price possible. So that's what I mean by the new normal. So then moving on, we moved into 2011 and 2012, and a little bit of this frugal fatigue set in. So people got a little tired of not spending money on wardrobes. They decided, enough's enough. I need to replace my winter boots. I need a new coat or a new dress. So we saw an uptick in spending in those 2 years, and certainly in the U.S. apparel market expanded by 4% in 2011 and 3% in 2012. And so that was pretty good growth, particularly after, the previous 3 years. So we did see an upturn. People were buying, not spending extravagantly, but certainly purchasing items that they needed to. They needed to rebuild their wardrobes again. And then, of course, this last year, it started off on a really positive note. The first half of 2013 was very strong for retailers. There was a lot of optimism in the US that finally we turned the corner. Unemployment rates were coming down. People had more disposable income. And then all of a sudden the fall hits, and it was a disastrous last 6 months of the year. A couple of things happened. We had a very dysfunctional US government which meant a government shutdown, which created instability in the markets. Companies were laying off people again. They weren't spending on hiring new people. Disposable incomes went down. It was all doom and gloom for a while. Consumer confidence dropped in the fall of 2011 to the lowest level it's been since 2008. So that was a big shock to the system. And unfortunately, retailers, how the buying season is. They bought for holiday shopping back in May, June when they were feeling optimistic. So they were stuck with all this inventory last fall. They began promotions already in October. The peak shopping season in the U.S., if you're not familiar with it, is the period between U.S. Thanksgiving and Christmas Day, December 25th. And in the U.S. this past year, there were 2 fewer weekends during that time period. It was only 22 days long, so it was just a disastrous holiday season. So the year did not end off very well. So that brings us to, so where we are today. We just finished Q1. 2014. It was a mixed quarter. We had some good news and some bad news. Consumer confidence is up for January, February. March, it went down a little bit, but still okay. There's been no dramatics coming out of Washington. We seem to have a stable government, so the outlook is pretty good. There's an election coming up in the fall, unfortunately, so that might cause some turbulence. Consumer spending has been okay. The same store sale comps were average, not outstanding. But again, they indicate that consumers are not buying extravagantly. They're looking for new design items. They're looking for items to update their wardrobes. Particularly strong was peplum tops and dresses, sneakers. Sweatshirts was all the rage, kind of designer sweatshirts or embellished sweatshirts. Accessories do very well in this market, jewelry, scarves, any way to enhance in a wardrobe on a lower budget. So those items continue to do well. So when I talk about retail, what I'm really talking about are these 3 segments: department stores, specialty stores, and online. So on the department store category, we have everything from luxury, which is obviously the Neiman Marcus, Bergdorf Goodman, Saks, Lord & Taylor, and Hudson's Bay Company, which is a Canadian company that now acquired Saks and Lord & Taylor, Century 21, TJ Maxx, Marshalls. And these are often stores where designer brands sell some of their inventory at the end of the season to get rid of anything that they didn't sell at regular price. So these are very popular, or doing quite well, because consumers obviously can get 50, 60% discounts on designer brands. So what we're seeing in this category, the department store category, is this barbell phenomenon. And what I mean by that is really, in terms of a strategy, department stores are deciding, you know what, we can't play the middle ground. Either we go towards the luxury consumer or we go towards the value consumer. We really can't afford to play both sides because the margins we're getting squeezed by online retailers, so we really have to tighten up our margins. So we're seeing, you know, what was interesting is Saks and Lord & Taylor, under new leadership, has been hiring a lot of senior people from some of the UK department stores, and they're moving more into the luxury chain. So we'll see how that pans out. And to the extent that any of these department stores have lower priced items or private label, what they do is they're opening separate units because they want the branding to be very different. So for example, Nordstrom has 148 Nordstrom Rack stores, and these are deep discount stores. It's the same designer wear that they carry in their normal department stores, but at a deep discount. And they plan to increase to 230 stores by the end of the year. And the same with Saks. They have 70 Saks off Fifth stores, and they plan to double that to 140 in the next 5 years. But the strategy is, let's keep Saks at the high-end, luxury, ultra-high net worth customer, and let's keep the Saks off Fifth targeted at the lower to middle market type customer. So there's very distinct strategy, and I think retailers are figuring out, you know, it's difficult to make money in this environment. We really need to go after a specific customer, offer promotions tailored at them specifically. They need to be smart about how they use their real estate within their stores, within their footprint. And so that's why we see this gravitational pull towards one or either market, and they're getting away with the middle stuff completely. They're also doing a lot more of their own private label. Macy's and Bloomingdale have done a very good job of putting actual marketing dollars behind their own private label designs. And obviously the margins are better for them, so that's the rationale. Then in the next category, we have specialty stores. And that includes a lot of international players like Zara, like Uniqlo, like Mango. Joe Fresh from Canada is entering the U.S. market in a big way. And a lot of the U.S. players like J. Crew is expanding, Gap and Banana Republic, Ann Taylor, The Loft. These are all large national chains all over America, offering affordable, tasteful clothing to most of America. They compete They try to compete on in-store promotions. They are located in all the great shopping meccas, and obviously in New York City, but across the United States. They're really targeting consumers with better quality designs and better affordable pricing. So that's been their strategy. They also are spending a lot more on their omni-channel strategy, and by that I mean they want to make sure that their online website, their social media, all of that is tied in with their brick and mortar store strategy. So they really, you know, we've got like Macy's, for example, or you can walk by their store, and if you have a particular app, it'll pop up and say, hey, Yolanda, you just bought something at Macy's last month, and guess what? We're having a promotion on this designer we know you love. So they're really trying to engage the consumer. Anytime I'm anywhere near the store or anytime I'm online, they somehow are trying to get better at that and smarter at that. And they need to be, quite frankly. You know, online has really taken a lot of business from their department stores. So they're putting money behind omni-channel and getting designer celebrities to come in. You know, it was just announced today again that Alexander Wang is doing a collaboration with H&M. You know, Kate Hudson, an actress, is heavily involved in Ann Taylor and The Loft. So, you know, they're really trying to get the consumer to come in, get them excited about shopping, which is a challenge. And also we see in this category a lot of the international players. And then, of course, the fast fashion names like Forever 21, H&M, Uniqlo. They've expanded tremendously since 2008 for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of U.S. chains went out of business, and there was a lot of vacancy rates in the U.S., so these international companies came in, bought these real estate, and opened up huge stores. You know, there's a Uniqlo that, I think it was 30,000 square feet, right in the middle of Fifth Avenue across from Cartier. I mean, you know, unheard of, but they were the only ones that could afford the real estate. They opened up this massive headquarters store, but it's fast fashion, and, you know, it competes on low prices, it competes on heavy inventory turns, which means that they have new merchandise in the store every 2 weeks. They do that better than anyone else I've seen, even better than like J. Crew or Gap and Banana Republic. They just turn that inventory count all the time. And they also are much smarter on the omni-channel. They know how to engage users, a younger demographic on social media and on online. So that's proven to be a successful formula for them. And also in the online category, we have, including the flash site sales, but we also have online retailers such as the luxury one, which is Net-a-Porter, which is unbelievably phenomenal success story. But then there's also ASOS and Shopbop, Revolve Clothing, Singer 22, Nasty Gal, Just Fab. I mean, there's endless numbers of online retailers in the U.S., which are great platforms for brands. They love to have multiple brands. Anytime you log in and you check under brands or designers, they easily have up to 150 brands. So it's a great venue for emerging brands. They love to showcase new and up-and-coming jewelry, accessory brands as well. And there's also this phenomenon called showrooming, which is what it sounds like, and I'm sure everyone's participated, where you're sitting at home in your pajamas and you're surfing online and trying to find the best price for a specific garment that you've been wanting to buy. And you just check all the websites, and whoever can give you the best deal or the best shipping or the best return policy. And so that's how they're playing that game, and it's proving to be a big formula. Apparel is the fastest growing category for online sales in the US, and it's estimated to be a $41 billion business this year. So it's phenomenal. And then there's also another phenomenon in this category called slow fashion. And I was just talking to this young lady here, this jewelry design. Etsy.com is a website that was founded about 5 years ago in the US. And it was in direct response to the fast fashion. People were tired of highly merchandised garments that were manufactured in China. They wanted specific artisan detail. They wanted some quality. They wanted a story behind their brand. And Etsy.com created this platform for young jewelry designers from Dubai, but also young artisans in the US who maybe just have one product or jewelry, T-shirts, whatever it may be. And they've created this great platform, and it's a shopping line. And it's doing phenomenally well. So there is still an audience for that special branding story or special product as well. So that was sort of the big macro picture of what's happening in the United States. So now I'm going to zero in a little bit on New York City, which is my home base, obviously. So New York City, obviously, we have virtually every store. We don't have quite the level of the Dubai Mall or the Emirates Mall, which is extraordinary on every count. But we do have luxury malls. They're obviously smaller. They're iconic brands like Bergdorf Goodman and Saks. But for New York City, it's really the first tier and the mid-tier stores which dominate in every area, everywhere you turn. And then mass market, we don't have too many. We don't have a Walmart, thankfully, in New York City, but we do have a Costco and Target. So we're well represented in New York City. And the way to think about New York City, I'm sure many of you have visited, but in terms of the shopping area, there are kind of three distinct areas to think about. So we have the Uptown, which is typically Fifth Avenue and Madison Ave corridor north of 57th Street. And that is home to all the iconic brands, the Bergdorfs and Tiffany's and Cartier on Fifth. But you go all the way up now, it's actually moving further and further north, but you go all the way up to 70. There's Ralph Lauren has 2 City Square blocks of his stores. You know, we have all the best labels, designer brands in that area. And obviously real estate prices are very expensive. Every brand would love to be in that area, but it's very, very costly. It caters to the ultra high net worth, the high net worth clientele, the professional crowd, and some tourists as well. There's a lot of 5-star hotels in that area, so it does brisk business in that area. Then we have this Midtown corridor, which is Fifth Avenue on the east side all the way to Broadway on the west. It's a very high trafficked area, a lot of tourists. It's also home to the garment district, the U.S. production business for fashion businesses. A lot of brands have offices and showrooms in that area. And this really, in terms of shopping, you pretty much have everything. It's a little bit of a hybrid. We have Bloomingdale's, Macy's, we have department stores, but we have, you know, all the fast fashion stores. We have every branded national chain represented in there. It's not typically an area where emerging brands start, mostly because the store units are so big. They're, you know, and for an emerging brand, it obviously cost is an issue. So we don't see too much of that in this area. Where we do see them is in the downtown corridor, and that is defined loosely. There's a number of neighborhoods in downtown New York, Soho, being the original one, but then there's the Greenwich Village and the Meatpacking District and the East Village, and all of these have, it's a bit of a mix. There's, you know, you have your Chanel and Burberry boutique, but you also have a lot of emerging brands right next to them. You know, you have small jewelry shops, and these are like 500 square foot units. So the pricing is a little bit more competitive, a little bit easier for an emerging brand to open up. We have some international players, and the vibe is very different. It's more of a hip and cool crowd downtown, more of a fashionista, a lot of tourists, a lot of celebrities live down there. So it's kind of a fun place to be for emerging brands. And a lot of emerging brands that still can't afford their own store will often do pop-up stores. They'll team up with a designer or a department store. So or they'll sell on the street. There's a lot of street vendors in that area. So it's a great community for emerging brands. But certainly, while I define those areas, I think what has really changed or evolved over the years is the fact that Midtown and downtown have begun to blur. And so, you know, we do see, you know, we're starting to see, you know, Chanel and Burberry and Valentino go all the way downtown to attract a hip and younger crowd. But what's interesting is if you walk into Chanel on Fifth Avenue, the store is very, very pristine, very lovely. It has a private VIP room. And you go downstairs or downtown to the Chanel, and it's got mostly filled with accessories, lower priced items. Definitely has a cooler, you know, all the leather goods come out and different kind of furniture, and there's no VIP area. It's very democratic. You know, they're trying to cater to a different, younger clientele who doesn't really like all that fussiness sometimes that comes with luxury brands. So we're seeing a lot of that. And we're also seeing a lot of the international players coming into the U.S. market. Topshop is the next one that's taking over the U.S. In New York City, they have a big facility being produced right near Rockefeller Center, and then they have another one further north uptown. So they're building and expanding in a big way. So the key takeaways, just on a macro level, is this concept of new normal. It really is here to stay, and I think from a retailer point of view, they've had to adjust their pricing strategy and their promotional strategy. Consumers are just not willing to pay retail anymore unless it's below a certain price point. So they really need to be clever about how to engage a consumer, offer those discounts, get them in the store. And for emerging brands, maybe, some of the brands that couldn't do business in stores like that maybe now can, because the price points are a little bit lower. So we see in Bloomingdale's, they've carved out a section on their fourth floor, I believe, which is showcasing the emerging brands that we mentor at FIT through DENYC, and they had a little in-store shop for them. They wouldn't have done that 5 years ago, but now there's an appetite for that, and the price points are finally down at a point where it could be attractive for Bloomingdale's to do that, and the brisk business and the marketing behind that, and they get coverage in WWD, et cetera. So everyone's trying to change the way they engage consumers, and obviously be more profitable on the store level. Specialty store, online, and factory outlet stores, those really, the growth in those categories have expanded, and largely at the expense of department stores. So we don't really see any change in that. They are definitely here to stay, the online stores. They're great categories for emerging brands. There's opportunities for you to sell online. Doesn't really matter if you're based here in Dubai or elsewhere. So I think that's a great thing for emerging brands. Department stores since 2008 have shown a 12% decline. So that just tells you, they're struggling. They need to figure out their strategy, update their store units, make it a little more attractive to their clientele, and determine whether they're going to play in the luxury market or the mass middle. And then for brands wanting to sell in the U.S., I think it's a great opportunity to position your category in stores where previously you weren't able to. So I think that's a good thing. And international chains, we'll continue to see that, at least for the foreseeable future. I know Topshop and Uniqlo and Joe Fresh both have commitments to expand in the next 5 years in the number of stores. So we're going to see that continue to the extent the dollar remains where it is. So that's a brief overview, a very quick overview on the macro issue. And so I'm going to jump right into the category I think that most people are interested in from here at least, and that is how to distribute your product in the U.S. And I will be spending far more detail, or get into this in more detail tomorrow during the workshop. But just wanted to touch on a couple of points. So before you get into the U.S. market, you really need to be prepared. So by that I mean sales and marketing material. Before you even start doing that, you really need to understand what your brand DNA is all about. You need to understand exactly who your customer is, who your price points are, what that customer wants and desires. Why should that customer wear your dress and not the hundreds of others that are hanging right next to it? You really need to zero in on what your brand represents and stay true to that core vision, that core brand DNA that we always talk about in the US. And once you have that down, then you're able to articulate what your brand means to the consumer. And you can articulate what that brand means to a retailer or a department store or a specialty store. Because inevitably they will say, before they get into any numbers or price points, tell me about your brand. Who do you shop for? Who do you dress? What does your ideal client look like? What does she do on a regular day, or he? What do they like to do in their off time? Are they tech savvy? Do they, what are their price points? What category do they like to buy? What is your biggest selling category? What represents the vision of this brand? And why is someone going to buy it over anyone else? And I know it sounds easy, but you really have to, it's not easy when you have hundreds of others offering similar items, and it gets to be repetitive. And distributors hear the same thing, that, oh, I dress for my friends. I love what I wear, so I just dress for someone like me. Well, that doesn't cut it. That's not going to be enough. You really have to tell them exactly who that customer is and why they need to be in your store, how you're going to get them in the store, why they keep coming back to your merchandise, what that brand represents to them, some kind of identity or story. And you need to continue to harp on that and build that up slowly. Maybe it's one item at a time, but defining your brand DNA is really, really critical. And then once you have that done, then you can begin to prepare your sales and marketing material. Because when you do approach department stores or specialty stores in the U.S., you need to have your line sheets, your hangers, your tags that go on every sample. You need to have a lookbook. You need to have all your email, your communications. You want cards. Everything needs to be with your brand and logo on. Everything needs to be consistent so that you're telling the same story. And I know for emerging brands that can be very expensive. So we often tell in our workshop that you should budget at least $2,000 per season to prepare a lookbook. And the ways to do that on the cheap is to try to hire photographers or stylists or makeup people. And in return for doing that for free, you can offer them images from your lookbook so that they can use that in their promotional material. So that's one way to cut the cost. You don't need to print 10,000 of these lookbooks. Emailing lookbooks is very much the way to go, so just make sure you have it online. A lot of young designers have invested in an iPad, and so they carry that with them to the store when they have the conversation and flip through the lookbooks. The next thing, get your financial information in order, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this tomorrow in the workshop, so I won't bore you today since it is very detailed, but by that I mean simply you're a new emerging designer. They're going to ask you for a credit reference. They want to make sure that you have the capital to produce your collection, deliver it on time, and they want to make sure that your factory has the capacity to make those garments, because their order sizes are typically, it could be anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000. And I always tell this great story that at the CFDA Fashion Incubator, Prabal Gurung was one of our young designers, and this was many years ago. He's now big and famous. He's no longer part of the incubator, but he was part of it, and he finally got his first order from a department store. He was very excited, and then he realized, oh my God, they ordered was 50,000, and I don't have any money. I can't produce this. I don't have any money to pay the factory. And he hadn't done his homework. He hadn't secured a factoring agent yet. He didn't have a line of credit at a bank. He didn't have anything in order. And the only thing that saved him was, thankfully, he won a CFDA grant, and he got a $50,000 check just in time. But I tell that story because if he hadn't won that check, that grant, obviously, that could have imploded on him, and he could have just as easily have lost that order. So you really need to be prepared on the financial side. The Dun & Bradstreet is it's a very easy thing to do. You go online and you register your company name, and they perform a background check. It's almost like a private eye, just doing a background check to see if that name has been involved in any legal altercations or if they've had any outstanding claims from banks. And that's often what retailers check, just to make sure that, they passed, they're on the Dun & Brad. So that's a very easy step to do. And then the last thing, learn how to speak retail. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this tomorrow, but this is terms like chargebacks, markups, markdown dollars, allowances, discounts, et cetera, et cetera. I think I have about 50 pages tomorrow. But literally, you want to understand what the terms are in the U.S., and some of this is very specific to the U.S. market only, but department stores, specialty retailers, they talk a certain language, so you need to understand what those terms are so that when you negotiate with them, you actually understand what it is they're asking. And I'll give some tips, obviously, tomorrow on how to navigate that, but there's ways to do it if you're an emerging brand, to try to get compensation on some of the more rigorous terms. They are quite onerous, I will say that. So it's good to be informed, so that's the point of that. And the way to get that is one suggestion, a plug for FIT. If you go online and check out their library, they have lots of books on this, so you can learn the terminology. Just get yourself prepared for that. So I'm going to focus on, and I'm just checking my time, cold calling, trade shows, and showrooms. So cold calling, no surprise, do your homework. You should have about, we tell in the workshop, get a list of 50 to 100 department stores or specialty stores that you would like to sell to. Do your homework. Find out which apparel categories or accessory categories they carry. Find out what the price points are in the store. Find out what floor you want to be on that store. Find out how they use sales and marketing to support emerging brands, find out what their online story, if it's consistent with the brick and mortar. And don't be afraid to talk to other brands that are in the store already or existing clients to get some information. And what do retailers look for? They know exactly who their customer is. So to the extent that you know who they are, you can put up, you can create your short list, you can eliminate the companies or the stores that you shouldn't waste your time on. In order to find the right contact, you need to make a couple of calls, find out who is the buyer, who is the merchandising agent. There are 2 databases that you can purchase in the US. One is called Infomat, and the other one is Fashion Index. I will tell you they are expensive and they're not entirely accurate. They're not 100% accurate. So even if you do use that as a source, it's basically a mass listing of all the retail stores in the US. You do need to go through them, each of them, and call to make sure that the same person is still there and hasn't jumped to another store. Watch the calendar. What that means is, understand when the buying season starts for them. Obviously it's a slow month now, April, but starting in May, June, July, they're buying for holiday and resort. They just finished buying for fall. So make sure you understand the calendar and make sure you hit them at the appropriate time. And then persistence and patience. If they say no, it's not unusual if you're an emerging brand. No doesn't necessarily mean no forever. It just means that no, not yet. Meaning they're probably going to take a look at you. They want to see your next season. They want to see how well you do. They want to see if your brand collection has some consistency to the previous one. They want to see if you've expanded at all or sold in any other stores. They're going to check to see what reviews are online, and they're going to monitor you. So that may be one reason they're giving you a no. Another reason is you just may not be right for the store, but there's always 100 more you can go to. So that's why doing your homework and pinpointing the right store is important. Trade shows. We all know what trade shows are, right? They are in every major city, and obviously in the U.S. there's a number of markets you can go to, not just New York. You may decide that your entry point is Atlanta, Miami, or Dallas in the Southeast. We get a lot of South American brands that do better in those trade shows just because of the Latina influence. And likewise, we get Asian and Australian people coming in through Los Angeles and Seattle. A little bit more bohemian, lighter materials, so they tend to do better at those trade shows. But of course, there's hundreds and hundreds of trade shows. They're all specific by category. There's one for denim, there's one for intimate apparel, there's an accessories one, there's a contemporary market, there's a luxury one. They're massive, massive events, so make sure you figure out which one is the right one. They're not inexpensive, so you should factor into your budget the cost of the booth, which is anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000. Obviously, travel accommodation, and you need to man the booth with a salesperson. So it is an investment. You want to make sure you have the right location. If they're only willing to give you, 8th floor by the bathroom in the far corner, maybe it's not really worth it for you to do that. Or if you do decide to do that, maybe try to figure out a way to get be a little more savvy on the marketing side, try to lure your buyers to your far corner. But, just think about these things because they're, you have to, if you're going to invest the money in a trade show, you want it to be efficient and effective for you. And then the other thing I would say on the alternative to trade shows is, and this is really coming from emerging brands in the US and other people that I've talked to. I did a workshop in Singapore last year, and their business affairs consulate office decided to, instead of enrolling them in a trade show, they opened up a hotel room right near the trade show, and they sent out a lot of advance notice. They handed out flyers at the entrance, and they lured people away from the trade shows into the hotel room, and they teamed up, and so it was like a little Singapore expo. So that's one way to do it, perhaps on the cheap. If you can team up with other local designers from this region, rent a room in a hotel or in Brooklyn and in Milk Studios. A lot of people, buyers are willing to go around the city. You don't have to just go to the main shows. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to flip through really quickly, but these are sources for you to get information on trade shows, on industry events, and on showrooms, and on fashion shows. So this gives you a full calendar. It gives you contact information. New York City fashioninfo.com is one of them. I don't represent any of them, so it doesn't matter which one you go to. FFWD, obviously you're all familiar with that, but they have a great calendar, industry events, conferences, showrooms. And this one is particularly good for showrooms. They will give you a lot of detail in terms of who they carry, the individuals you should contact, et cetera. So these are all 3 good sites. And then lastly, I'm just checking my watch, I'm rushing a bit, but showrooms, that's the last one we're going to talk about. And before you invest in a showroom, some things you need to know. Obviously, I think everyone knows what a showroom is, but it's in the US, there's quite a few of them. In New York City, there's hundreds of them, literally. But it's an open space. You know, they often cater to not just one brand, several brands. You need to do your homework, obviously, make sure it's the right showroom, again, for your design or your styles. Some just cater to certain categories, so you need to do your homework on that. They're privately owned, they're not open to the public. They often have great buyer lists and access to the right retailers, so ask up front who their good clients are. Make sure that they can deliver on whatever they're gonna charge you for that. It's appointment only, but once you do get in, you've got a lot of expenses to think about. So not only do you have, well, we'll get to those expenses, but before you even get there, you have to send them one sample from each of your collections. You have to send them lookbooks. You have to have your purchase orders and line sheets all done up. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Each sample has to have a hang tag with the style number, the sizes, the colors. You want to have a branding sign. You want to have a description of the brand so the sales associates know how to sell your brand to the right buyers. You want to have the pricing strategy. They need to understand what the markup range is. They need to understand what your cost is. All of that needs to be done. So it's really, it's difficult for emerging brands to get in. And from the showroom point of view, they don't necessarily want to take you on if they don't think that they can sell your product. And if you are a new brand, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So it's often a strategy for larger brands or more established brands. And because of the capital investment, you'll be paying them a sales commission on all their sales, 12% on average. And on top of that, there's a monthly fee. It's kind of like a rental fee for using their showroom. So it's a significant expense. And I would also think about which market you want to be in. It may not, obviously New York City is a main one, but it's a very expensive one. So maybe the right market for you might be West Coast or Southeast. So don't be afraid to try one of the other larger markets for better pricing. And then lastly is my word of caution, which I understand is somewhat controversial comment to make in these markets, because I understand a lot of retailers in this region only do consignment. So here's my, maybe never sell might be a little too hard, but I would say avoid it if possible. And if you can avoid it, if there is a very compelling reason for you to do consignment because the opportunity to be in Dubai Mall or a great location is so compelling that you have to be there, make sure you ask the right questions. Make sure you're knowledgeable going in. So by that I mean, ask them how much marketing dollars they're going to put behind your brand. Ask them how the sales associates are going to be informed. Ask where your garments are going to be hanging or where it's going to be displayed. Make sure that they are really excited about carrying your brand, because if they don't really feel that excited, they're not going to sell it. Let's be honest. So you really have to get a good feeling from them that they know how to sell your product and that they're going to make the commitment. Also find out what pricing they're going to sell your goods at. Are they going to keep it at regular price, or are they going to start discounting 1 week after they receive the merchandise? And then on the financial side, because it is such a calculated risk for young designers, because on the worst case, if you don't sell any of the inventory or the merchandise or very little of it, it all comes back to you and you're kind of stuck with old inventory. And that's a big upfront cost to you. So figure out what that cost is. See if you have a plan B in mind. Do you have somewhere where you can sell those goods, at an off-price retailer or line up a discount store? Or maybe you can shorten the terms that the buyer actually has the goods. So maybe if they're not selling in 3 weeks, maybe they give you a heads up so you can pull back some of that inventory and get it online on your own website, or try pop-up shops, or try to sell in some other channel. But it is, there are stories in the US with emerging designers that took a chance because they really wanted to be in Nordstrom, and they were Nordstrom wanted a $50,000 order, and in the end, they only sold 4,000, so they were left with 45,000 of goods, and that really is a huge capital expense for these companies, and then they're stuck with old inventory. They have to sell it on really cheap prices. They don't make any money on that, and in the end, Nordstrom didn't even renew their contract next year. So it can be, it's really tough. It's a tough thing to do, so just be really careful before you enter into a consignment agreement to make sure that you have all the information up front and that you have a plan in case it doesn't sell. So that was a very quick run through, so thank you for your attention, and I promised to leave some time, so I'm going to open it up to questions.
1 or 2 seasons, you allow yourself on consignment, but after that, you should really sort of like hold your fort and insist on.
Absolutely. Well, I don't even tell them 1 or 2 seasons. I tell them to hold their fort right away. And if you really feel like it's compelling, maybe, try to negotiate at least a better deal on the consignment. Maybe if they want 40,000, say, okay, how about you order 5, 10,000, buy that up front, and the rest can be on consignment. Try to work with them, but it's such a high risk, but if they're telling me that they need to see 2 seasons of consignment before they make a commitment, that tells me that they're not really going to push to sell your product. That tells me they're going to take a chance on you just because they have some space left on their hangers. So that, I don't know, if I was a designer, I don't know if I would take that risk. I would rather try to find maybe smaller shops. Maybe it's not a great big department store, but some smaller shop that says, I absolutely have to have your brand. I love your brand. My customers will love your brand. I would rather have that kind of buyer, because then I feel a little confident that my goods will be sold and my sales associates at the stores are going to push this product. So you really have to weigh. I know it's compelling, and every year I talk to young brands and they never know what to do. I just got a call before I came to Dubai from a young woman. They wanted her in Bloomingdale's, totally on consignment. It was a $60,000 order. Her price points start at $1,200. So think about it, 60,000 of $1,200 dresses. That's like a big risk. First of all, just at her price points in the U.S. That's a challenging market in the U.S. given all the macro issues I just told you about. So the fact that it's going to be in Bloomingdale's, where the sales associates, it's probably 1 for every 100 customers. I don't know if they've updated it, but there's not a lot of sales going on there. So that's a big risk for her. 60,000 is a lot of money for her. And if she doesn't sell, she's saddled with all this luxury dresses at, old inventory, basically. So, we talked about ways to get her to try to negotiate a better deal. Maybe agree to do consignment, but lower, not 60, agree to a lower commitment perhaps. And if it doesn't sell in 4 weeks, give her a heads up so she can pull back some of that and try other channels to sell that. And try to get them to commit to do some marketing dollars, or at least focus on the brand and do some marketing. And I always tell them that, they have to want you just as much as you want them. So make sure they really love your brand and understand your brand, and it's right for their consumers.
It's a little bit embarrassing to say that even our better boutiques in the region are actually practicing the consignment. But I think we're hoping that will change with a bit of magnification of the brands, that they should be able to demand a bit more.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree. I appreciate
that. It's a vicious cycle, but I think it's a cycle that needs to be broken, hopefully soon.
It is, and it's still a practice in the U.S. with the larger department stores, and typically for smaller emerging brands. But in the U.S. there are other stores that they can carry without consignment, so that usually is the channel that emerging brands go. But more and more brands are realizing that they're just not going to do consignment. They can go online, they can do smaller shops, and just avoid that. So hopefully our vicious cycle in the U.S., we're probably a little bit further ahead than this region, but hopefully it'll end. But for you all, I appreciate it's a challenge.
I just wanted to make a comment to you all that there's such an incredible energy from the talent that I'm seeing, and the energy of this event. And I want to say you can band together. I mean, the concept of a pop-up shop, you can take that into your own hands. And I think that your territory is really ripe for something new and exciting. And if you banded together, you've got a register, you created an event, you did your own selling, there's an opportunity where you can start making some buzz, and then you'll see these buyers will say, well, you know what, I really need to have some of your things. You have more leverage that way. So think about pop-up shops and creating this buzz and these kind of events and these happenings that are going on so you can sell your things.
Yeah, and that actually, that's great advice, and that's what a lot of U.S. young emerging brands are doing. You know, they met through this DENYC FIT program, and they finally got a deal with Bloomingdale's. They carved out a little store, but there's more power when you get together, because it's not just one brand they're taking a risk on, it's multiple brands. So it's a great idea.
Well, Fashion Forward is happy to announce, we announced this at the industry lunch 2 days ago, that we actually brokered a deal with Galeries Lafayette, and they're actually doing a pop-up store for Fashion Forward designers on the catwalk and at the garden, so it's including the accessory designers. We're going to have a month or 2 month long massive retail space, actually I would say double the size of this hall, at the Galeries Lafayette in Dubai Mall. So that's a good
Bravo.
Good start.
Well done.
And we're hoping, and we're really hoping that the other retail giants, because there's a lot of them here, they're all here, we're hoping that they would follow suit. And I know that they're truly starting to realize that it's important to give a bit of space to our homegrown designers. I think it's becoming sort of like politically correct. And fashionable to really have them on their shelf
Support
space.
your local brands,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah.
I know that some of them are actually here right now and doing investigation, they're doing research, they're seeing what's upcoming, so it's all about making noise, and it's
Absolutely.
all about having visibility.
Yeah, no, and I applaud Fashion Forward and what you're trying to do here, because it wasn't that long ago in New York City that we just started these programs, and we realized that we'd be better if we banded together. So it's a function of FIT and Parsons and Savannah School of Design and getting people, knowledgeable industry experts, to mentor young people, put them in front of industry experts, put them in front of retailers, get government support behind it and private sector, and if we can all, and production. That's our last challenge in New York. Our production's a little low, but that's what we're trying to do. Here too, yeah, exactly. We need to figure out that nut to crack. But yeah, it's definitely been helpful to emerging brands, and the exposure has been invaluable. So congratulations.
Thank you. Good. Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you very much. Sorry I went so quickly, but feel free to email me, or if I'll see you tomorrow at the workshop, I'm happy to talk further. Thanks.